The blaze had already engulfed half the barn when Tabitha Bentley woke to the acrid smell of smoke filling her lungs. Colorado Territory, 1876, wasn't kind to 18-year-old girls living alone, but nothing had prepared her for the terror of that night, the night that would leave her forever changed, her skin a testament to both tragedy and survival. She bolted upright in bed, momentarily confused by the orange glow flickering through her window. Then realization struck with horrifying clarity. Fire. The sound of wood cracking and popping filled her ears as she scrambled to her feet. Her father's farm, her only inheritance after his death 6 months prior, was burning around her. Tabitha grabbed her shawl and ran toward the door, but the heat pushed back against her like a living thing. The roof timbers groaned ominously above. She hesitated only a moment before plunging forward into the corridor, desperate to escape. The flames licked up the walls, consuming the dry timber with ferocious hunger. She could see the front door just 20 feet away when a burning beam crashed down. Pain exploded across her right side as fire kissed her flesh. Her screams joined the roar of the inferno as she scrambled blindly forward, rolling to extinguish the flames that had caught her nightdress. With one final, desperate lunge, she burst through the doorway into the cool night air, collapsing onto the dirt yard as neighbors from the nearby homesteads arrived to battle the blaze. "Lord have mercy," whispered Mrs. Fletcher, the first to reach her. "Someone fetch the doctor." Tabitha remembered little of the following days, just fragments of agony, as Dr. Patterson cleaned and dressed the burns that covered much of her right arm, shoulder, neck, and part of her face. When consciousness finally returned fully, the pain had dulled to a persistent throb, but the real suffering had only begun. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Bentley," Dr. Patterson told her gravely. "But I won't lie to you, the scarring will be significant." He was right. As the weeks passed and her wounds healed, Tabitha watched her reflection transform. The smooth skin she had once taken for granted now gave way to a landscape of pink and red, with ridges and valleys that told the story of that terrible night. The burns covered nearly the entire right side of her neck, crawled up to her jawline, and marked her arm from shoulder to wrist. When she finally ventured into town 3 months after the fire, the whispers began immediately. Children stared openly, while adults averted their eyes after the first shocked glance. The townsfolk of Silver Creek had known her all her life, yet now they treated her like a stranger or worse, like something to be pitied or feared. "What happened to you was a tragedy, dear," said Mrs. Winters, the general store owner's wife, her eyes darting everywhere but at Tabitha's scars. "But you're still young. Perhaps you could move to Denver, start fresh where no one knows you." The suggestion stung worse than the burns had. Silver Creek was her home. The small farm on its outskirts, what remained of it, was all she had left of her parents. Yet with each passing day, the sideways glances and hushed conversations that stopped when she approached made her question whether she belonged anymore. "Looks like the devil got hold of that one," she overheard a traveling salesman say to the barber as she passed the shop one afternoon. "Shame, might have been pretty once." Tabitha pulled her shawl higher around her neck and quickened her pace. She had come to town to inquire about work. The small insurance payment from her father's policy wouldn't last forever, but after 4 rejections, her spirit was as scarred as her skin. "Miss Bentley," called Mrs. Sullivan from the hotel's front porch, waving her over. "Could I speak with you a moment?" Hope flickered briefly. The Sullivan Hotel was the finest establishment in Silver Creek, catering to the occasional wealthy travelers and mining executives who passed through. "Yes, madam." Tabitha approached, trying to hold her head high despite the instinct to hide her damaged face. Mrs. Sullivan's expression was kind but troubled. "I heard you're looking for work." "Yes, I am." Tabitha straightened her shoulders. "I can cook, clean, so whatever you need." "I'm sure you're quite capable," Mrs. Sullivan said carefully, "but I'm afraid I can't offer you a position out front. The guests, you see." Her eyes flicked momentarily to Tabitha's scars. Perhaps something in the kitchen where you wouldn't be visible. The humiliation burned hotter than the flames ever had. Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan, but I believe I'd prefer work where I'm not hidden away like something shameful. She turned and walked away, blinking back tears. By the time she reached the edge of town, her resolve had hardened. She would not hide, she would not leave. Somehow she would rebuild both her farm and her life. The following week brought unexpected news. A cattle drive was passing near Silver Creek, and the rancher, a Mr. Callahan, was looking to sell some of his stock before continuing north. Tabitha saw an opportunity. With the remaining insurance money, she could purchase a few head of cattle and begin building a new livelihood. The day the cattle drive was due to arrive, she donned her best dress, a modest blue calico that covered as much of her scarring as possible without her usual shawl, which would be impractical for business. She wouldn't hide today. She would stand tall, speak clearly, and be judged on her merits, not her appearance. The main street was already bustling when she arrived. Cowboys milled about, dusty from the trail and eager for whatever comforts Silver Creek could offer. In the center of it all stood a tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered Stetson, clearly giving instructions to the others. Mr. Callahan, she presumed. Tabitha took a deep breath and approached. Mr. Callahan, I'm Tabitha Bentley. I'd like to discuss purchasing some cattle. The rancher turned, and Tabitha immediately realized her mistake. This wasn't Mr. Callahan, but someone younger, perhaps 30, with keen hazel eyes that widened slightly as they took in her appearance. Grant Callahan, he corrected with a tip of his hat. My father passed 2 years back. I run the outfit now. His gaze was direct but not unkind. You're looking to buy? Yes, Tabitha replied, fighting the urge to turn her scarred side away from him. I have a small property outside of town. I'd like to start raising cattle. A flicker of something surprise perhaps crossed his face. That's not what most young ladies come looking for. I'm not most young ladies, she said evenly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, I expect you're not. He gestured toward the temporary corral where his cattle were being held. Let me show you what we've got. As they walked, Tabitha felt the stares of townsfolk following them. She heard a snicker from a group of young men lounging outside the saloon. Look at that, one said, not bothering to lower his voice. Guess Callahan's desperate for female company if he's taking up with Scarface Bentley. Hot shame washed over her, but before she could react, Grant Callahan stopped abruptly and turned toward the speaker. His expression remained calm, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You got something to say, he called out clearly. You can say it to my face. The young man faltered, suddenly less brave. No offense meant, stranger, just passing the time. Then find another way to pass it, Grant replied, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable warning. One that doesn't involve disrespecting a lady. The group shuffled awkwardly and dispersed. Grant turned back to Tabitha, who stood frozen in surprise. I apologize for the interruption, Miss Bentley. You were telling me about your plans for cattle raising. Tabitha stared at him, utterly bewildered by the casual way he had defended her honor, and then moved on as if the encounter meant nothing. As if her scars meant nothing. Why did you do that? She asked. Do what? Stand up for me? You don't even know me. Grant Callahan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. My mother taught me to respect people who face their challenges head-on. Those scars of yours, they're proof you survived something that might have killed someone else. That deserves respect, not mockery. The simple dignity in his words left her speechless. For months, she had endured pity, revulsion, and awkward avoidance. Never once had anyone suggested her scars might represent something worthy of admiration. Now, he continued, gesturing toward the corral, shall we discuss business? The next hour passed in a blur as Grant showed her his herd, explaining the merits of different animals with a patience that suggested he took her seriously as a buyer. By the end of their conversation, Tabitha had agreed to purchase 5 head of cattle, a modest start, but one she could manage alone. I'll have them delivered to your property tomorrow, Grant said as they concluded their business. Where exactly is your farm? About 2 miles east of town. The old Bentley place, though much of it burned down recently, recognition flashed in his eyes. You're rebuilding after a fire, trying to, she admitted. It's slow going on my own, Grant nodded thoughtfully. My men and I will be in town for 3 days before moving the rest of the herd north. If you'd accept the help, we could lend a hand with some repairs. Tabitha's pride warred with practicality. I couldn't ask that of you. You didn't ask, I offered. His smile was warm, genuine. Consider it a gesture of goodwill to a new business associate. The following morning, Tabitha was up at dawn, preparing for the cattle delivery. She had spent hours clearing a section of the old pasture and repairing what fencing she could manage on her own. The charred remains of the barn stood as a grim reminder of all she had lost, but she refused to dwell on it today. When the sound of approaching horses reached her, she straightened her dress and ran a nervous hand over her hair. She had tied it back simply, making no effort to arrange it to hide her scars. Grant Callahan had seen them in full daylight and treated her with dignity. She would not cower now. 4 riders appeared, driving the small herd of cattle before them. Grant rode at the lead, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. As they drew closer, he raised a hand in greeting. "Morning, Miss Bentley," he called. "We've brought your new tenants." The men efficiently herded the cattle into the pasture while Grant dismounted and approached her. Today, she noticed details she had missed in town: the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes, the way his light brown hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the confident ease of his movements. "Your property has good potential," he commented, surveying the land. "Plenty of grazing, access to the creek for water. You chose well." "My father chose it," she said. "He had a good eye for land," Grant nodded, "and his daughter has a good head for business from what I can tell." He turned toward the burned-out shell of the barn. "That the fire that caught you?" The directness of his question startled her, but strangely she didn't mind. "Yes, 6 months ago. I woke up just in time to escape, but—" She gestured vaguely toward her scarred side. "But not without paying a price," he finished for her. There was no pity in his voice, just understanding. "Well, we can't replace what was lost, but we can help build something new. The men and I brought tools. If you're agreeable, we'll start on a basic shelter for your cattle today." "Why are you doing this?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Grant considered her for a moment. "When I took over the ranch after my father died, a neighboring outfit helped me through my first winter. Didn't know me from Adam, but they saw someone trying to stand on their own feet and decided to lend a hand." He shrugged. "I'm just passing along the favor." Over the next 3 days, Tabitha's property transformed. Grant and his men constructed a simple but sturdy shelter for the cattle, repaired the remaining fencing, and even helped shore up the damaged section of her house. They worked from sunup to sundown, refusing anything but meals in return. During those meals, shared at the rough table in her kitchen, Tabitha found herself laughing for the first time in months. Grant's men were respectful, treating her scars as unremarkable, following their boss's lead, and Grant himself was unexpected. Behind his competent, serious exterior lay a dry wit and thoughtful nature that drew her in despite her best efforts to maintain a proper distance. "You never said how you got into cattle ranching," she remarked on the second evening as they shared coffee after dinner. "Family business," he replied. "My father came west from Pennsylvania in '49, chasing gold like everyone else. Found none but discovered he had a knack for raising cattle instead, built the ranch from nothing." His expression grew distant. "When he died, everyone expected I'd sell out. I was only 28, no wife, no children, but that land was his legacy, couldn't bear to part with it." "I understand," Tabitha said softly. "That's why I stayed here even after." She touched her scarred cheek unconsciously. Grant watched the gesture, his eyes thoughtful. "You know, my father had a saying about scars. He earned plenty in his day. Ranch work isn't kind to a man's body." He'd say, "Every scar tells a story of something that tried to break you and failed." The words settled around her heart like a warm blanket. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "In some ways," Grant agreed with a slight smile. "In others, stubborn as a mule, trait I apparently inherited." On the third day, as sunset approached, the work was complete. A new shelter stood where the old barn had been smaller but solidly built. The house repairs would keep her warm through the coming winter. Her 5 cattle grazed contentedly in the pasture. "We'll head out at first light tomorrow," Grant told her as his men packed up their tools. "Drives headed to Cheyenne, then back to our ranch near Laramie." Tabitha felt an unexpected pang at his words. "I don't know how to thank you properly for all this." "No thanks needed. You'll make something good here. That's thanks enough." They stood in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In these 3 days, Tabitha had grown accustomed to Grant's presence, his steady reliability, his quiet strength, the way he looked at her as if he truly saw her, scars and all. "Miss Bentley Tabitha," Grant said suddenly, turning to face her. "My ranch is 3 days' ride from here. I make regular trips to deliver cattle throughout the territory." He paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you when I'm passing through?" The question sent her heart fluttering in a way she hadn't experienced since before the fire. "You want to call on me?" "Very much so," he replied simply. "But surely there are women in Laramie who don't look like." She gestured toward her scarred face. Grant's expression grew serious. "Those scars are proof you survived, Tabitha. They show your strength, not your weakness." He stepped closer, his voice low and earnest. "I've met many women in my travels. None have impressed me with their courage and determination the way you have in just these few days." Tears pricked at Tabitha's eyes. "Then yes," she whispered, "you may call on me when you're passing through." True to his word, Grant returned 6 weeks later. The cattle drive to Cheyenne complete, he appeared at her gate one crisp autumn morning, hat in hand and a smile warming his features when she came out to greet him. "Miss Bentley," he said with a slight bow, "your cattle are looking well tended." "Mr. Callahan," she returned, unable to suppress her own smile. "They've had a conscientious owner. He stayed 2 days, helping with small tasks around the property and sharing stories of his life in Wyoming. In the evenings, they sat before her hearth, talking until the fire burned low. When he left, he promised to return within the month, a promise he kept with unwavering regularity through the changing seasons. With each visit, Tabitha felt the walls she had built around her heart since the fire crumbling further. Grant brought news of the wider world, books he thought she might enjoy, and once, a beautiful blue silk scarf that matched her eyes. Never once did he treat her scarring as something to be hidden or overcome. It was simply part of her, like her determined spirit and quick mind, both of which he openly admired. Winter arrived, blanketing Silver Creek in snow. Tabitha's little farm stood strong against the elements thanks to the repairs, and her small herd sheltered comfortably in their new structure. The townsfolk had gradually adjusted to her scarred appearance, particularly as they witnessed her success with the cattle, and perhaps more significantly, as they observed the obvious interest of the handsome rancher who visited with increasing frequency. "Seems that Callahan fellow is sweet on you," Mrs. Sullivan commented when Tabitha visited the general store in early December. The hotel owner's tone held genuine warmth rather than the pity Tabitha had grown accustomed to. "He's a good man, from what folks say." "He is," Tabitha agreed simply, unwilling to reveal more of her heart even as it thundered in her chest at the mention of his name. 2 days before Christmas, a snowstorm swept through the region, leaving drifts higher than fence posts and temperatures that froze breath in the air. Tabitha had resigned herself to spending the holiday alone, certain that no one would brave such conditions for social calls. She was checking on her cattle in the late afternoon, ensuring they had enough hay to keep them warm through the night, when she heard the impossible sound of approaching hoofbeats. Stepping outside, she squinted against the glare of sun on snow to see a familiar figure on horseback making his way slowly up the path to her farm. "Grant," she called, running toward him without thinking. "What on earth are you doing traveling in this weather?" He dismounted stiffly, his face red from cold beneath his heavy scarf. "Promised I'd be here for Christmas," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "Callahans keep their promises." Tabitha hurried him inside where a fire roared in the hearth. As he removed his outer layers, she prepared hot coffee, stealing glances at him, the snow melting in his hair, the strong line of his jaw now visible without his scarf, the weary satisfaction in his eyes as he looked around her warm kitchen. "You rode 3 days in this weather," she said, handing him the steaming cup. "You could have frozen to death." "Worth the risk," he replied, his eyes holding hers steadily. "Couldn't bear the thought of you alone at Christmas." Something in his gaze made her breath catch. They had been dancing around their feelings for months, neither quite putting words to the connection that had grown between them. But now, in the firelit quiet of her kitchen, with snow falling gently outside, the moment for truth had arrived. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why me, Grant? You could court any woman from here to Cheyenne." Grant set down his coffee cup and took her hands in his. Gently, deliberately, he raised one hand to touch the scarred side of her face. His fingers traced the ridged skin with such tenderness that tears welled in her eyes. "Because you're the bravest person I've ever known," he said, his voice low and certain. "Because you face each day with dignity and strength that humbles me. Because when I'm with you, I'm the best version of myself." He paused, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Because I love you, Tabitha Bentley, scars and all." The words washed over her like healing balm. For so long, she had believed the fire had taken not only her skin but her chance at love, at being seen as desirable. Yet here stood a man who had traveled through blizzards to be with her, who looked at her damaged face and saw only beauty and courage. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice catching. "I have for months now." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Grant leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that promised a future she had thought forever lost to her. That Christmas marked the beginning of their new life together. By spring, wildflowers bloomed around Tabitha's farm, and preparations for a June wedding were underway. The town of Silver Creek, which had once whispered behind her back, now embraced the romance blossoming between the scarred young woman who had refused to be defeated and the steadfast rancher who saw beyond her burns to the strength within. On their wedding day, as Tabitha stood before the minister in a cream-colored dress that made no concessions to hide her scars, she caught whispers from the assembled guests. "She looks beautiful," someone murmured. "Those scars hardly matter when she smiles like that." Grant, handsome in his best suit, took her hands in his as they exchanged their vows. His eyes never left hers, filled with a love so pure and unconditional that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I, Grant, take you, Tabitha, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I promise to cherish and protect you, to honor and respect you, to stand beside you through all of life's joys and sorrows, as long as we both shall live." When she spoke her own vows, her voice trembled with emotion but never faltered. After the ceremony, as they greeted their well-wishers, the bride and groom overheard Mrs. Fletcher speaking to another guest. "Never thought our Tabitha would find such happiness after that terrible fire," the older woman remarked. "Just goes to show, even the worst tragedies can lead to unexpected blessings." Grant's arm tightened around Tabitha's waist. "She's right, you know," he murmured against her ear. "If not for the fire, I might never have noticed the remarkable woman you are when I rode into Silver Creek that day." "Are you saying you wouldn't have looked twice at me without these?" Tabitha teased, gesturing toward her scars. "I'd have noticed your beautiful eyes," Grant countered with a smile. "But I might not have immediately recognized your extraordinary courage. The fire revealed your strength, Tabitha. It didn't diminish your beauty, it transformed it into something even more remarkable." As twilight fell over their wedding celebration, Grant led his bride in their first dance as husband and wife. The lanterns strung around the town square cast a golden glow over the gathering, illuminating faces, both familiar and new Grant's ranch hands who had traveled from Wyoming, townspeople who had known Tabitha all her life, and even a few travelers passing through who had been invited to join the festivities. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked as they moved slowly to the music. Tabitha looked up at her husband, this man who had taught her that scars could be badges of honor rather than marks of shame. "I'm thinking about the fire," she admitted. "Not with regret, but with gratitude almost." "Is that strange?" Grant shook his head. "Not strange at all. That fire forged you into the woman you are today, the woman I love with all my heart. And it led me to you," she added softly. "Perhaps some destruction is necessary for new growth." As the years passed, the Callahan Ranch in Wyoming flourished under their joint stewardship. Tabitha brought her small herd north, combining it with Grant's larger operation, and proved herself as capable a rancher as she had promised that first day in Silver Creek. Their family grew with the birth of a daughter, followed by twin sons 2 years later. From their earliest understanding, the children were taught to see their mother's scars not as flaws but as symbols of her courage. "Mama fought fire and won" became a phrase of pride in their household. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their children play in the yard, Grant presented Tabitha with a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate silver locket. When opened, it revealed an inscription. "Every scar tells a story of something that tried to break you and failed." Tabitha traced the words with her finger, her heart full. "Your father's wisdom," she said with a smile. "Wisdom I've come to understand more deeply through loving you," Grant replied, taking her hand. The years of ranch work had added new scars to both their hands, small nicks and burns that told the story of their shared life. "Every day, I thank whatever twist of fate brought you into my life." Tabitha leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching their children's laughter illuminate the gathering dusk. The burns that had once marked her as an object of pity now felt like an essential chapter in her story, one that had led her to this moment of profound happiness. "The fire took much from me," she said softly, "but it gave me so much more. It gave me the chance to discover my own strength, and it gave me you." Grant pressed a kiss to her scarred cheek, the gesture as natural and loving as it had been from the very beginning. "And every day I'm grateful it did," he whispered. "Those scars led me to the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, the love of my life." As the sun set over the Wyoming range, casting long shadows across the land they had built together, Tabitha Bentley Callahan knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how painful their beginning, led exactly where they were meant to. Her scars were not merely proof she had survived, they were the map that had guided her home, to the arms of a man who saw beyond the surface, to the unbreakable spirit within.